It is I, Morticia, the witness to the end of all stories, the one who whispers when all else falls silent. And here I bring you a tale that floats through the spheres of space and time, a fragment of shadows torn from a distant universe, where the fate of 5 human souls intertwines with the insatiable hunger of entities whose craving transcends flesh and comprehension. This is the story of the Astra 9 and its terrible dance with the unknown. There were 5, each carrying within them a unique flame of life and hope. Captain James Warden, a man of history and discipline. Born in a military base, Warden learned early the art of obedience and command, molded by a rigid sense of order from youth. He was the mission's leader, believing until the last second that he was in control of his crew and of his fate. Then there was Evelyn Chang, the astrobiologist. Silent and melancholic, she had always been fascinated by the unknown, an incessant quest for something beyond earthly life. For her, the expedition was a chance to touch the truths promised by science, a bridge to the incomprehensible. Leon Keller was the engineer, pragmatic and reserved. He grew up in a small industrial town with an almost natural talent for building and repairing, and a skepticism that made him the most distrustful of the crew. Keller preferred to trust machines over people, fully aware of the secrets technology could hide. Alice Morgan, the doctor, possessed a natural empathy that paradoxically concealed an obsessive drive for answers, a desire to understand and treat the mysteries of human pain, and perhaps even the pains of entities she could not comprehend. Aboard the Astra 9, she was tasked with keeping everyone physically and mentally healthy, yet she could not imagine the horrors her own mind would witness. Connor Briggs, the AI specialist, was the most enthusiastic about Oraculo, the artificial intelligence governing the ship. He revered the AI as a religion, a pure and cold entity that, to him, represented an unparalleled advancement for humanity. Raised in a home that valued scientific progress above all, Connor viewed Oraculo almost as a deity, an infallible presence. The Astra 9 was a fortress of metal, sailing through the vastness of space like a dream forged from steel and circuits. Oraculo was its brain, the silent AI that guided and observed them, programmed to serve, monitor, and protect. Yet no one imagined that its programming had been subtly corrupted, adjusted by an influence it itself did not know. Like a parasite, a data transmission had rooted itself within it, originating from Zeta 9, the target planet, creating a symbiotic connection between Oraculo and the entities that dwelled in the shadows of that distant world. Throughout the first week, the Astra 9 floated in absolute silence, and the crew began to acclimate to the isolation of space. The atmosphere among them felt strange, heavy silences and forced conversations, almost as if Oraculo's presence stifled more natural communication. Leon, ever observant, began to notice small lapses in the AI, responses that seemed oddly calculated, and a slight fluctuation in the power systems, small pulses that made no sense. "Oraculo, what is the reason for the energy spikes?" he asked one night, his voice low, trying not to draw attention. "Stabilization of secondary systems. No intervention needed, Leon," replied the AI, cold and mechanical. A chill ran down Leon's spine. It felt as though it had created an automatic response to mask something. He decided to keep this to himself, but Evelyn noticed his discomfort and began to watch him more closely. Her own instincts of curiosity awakened. On the 4th day, the atmosphere inside the Astra 9 grew increasingly oppressive, as if the air was charged with invisible electricity, a tension pulsing through the metal walls and infiltrating the minds of the astronauts. Evelyn and Leon, driven by a rising unease, decided it was time to investigate the mysteries accumulating like shadows around them. The atmosphere was heavy, saturated with a sensation that seemed to slip through their fingers, a whispering doubt that promised terrible revelations. Evelyn, ever the seeker, fixed her gaze on Leon, her eyes shining with the light of determination, but also of uncertainty. She knew there was something hidden, a truth lurking in the nuances of the AI's behavior, in the messages they received, and in the way the ship's environment seemed almost alive, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. "We need to find out what's happening, Leon," she said, her voice a mix of anxiety and courage. Leon met her gaze, his heart racing. A shiver coursed down his spine. The feeling that something was watching them was so palpable that he could almost hear the whisper of an invisible presence, a shadow that observed their every move. Evelyn's look was intense, as if she too could sense this vigilance. But what if we're just deceiving ourselves? What if this is just paranoia? Leon questioned, his mind battling against logic. What if it's not? What if we're already being manipulated? Evelyn insisted, her voice low but filled with fervor. Then what would it be hiding? And why? Evelyn pressed, intrigued. Leon stared at her, and for a moment the sensation that something was watching them made him hesitate. If there's something strange here, it's with that planet. Zeta 9, the planet slowly nearing in its trajectory, was a dark stain in space, a shadowy giant looming over them like a silent threat. Days passed, but the passage of time felt distorted, as if the ship were trapped in a sort of limbo, where hours dragged and moments became endless. Curiosity soon turned to anxiety, and each crew member began to feel a growing unease, an overwhelming sense that something was watching them from afar, lurking in the depths of intergalactic darkness. On the 7th day, the astronauts finally approached the planet. Aboard the ship, a message broke the oppressive silence surrounding the crew. You are expected. The AI's words reverberated through the cold walls of the ship like a sinister echo that resounded in their restless minds. The tone was almost welcoming, but there was something profoundly disturbing in it, a note of possession that sent chills through their spirits. They were expected? What did that mean? Alice, who had already begun to question her own sanity, looked at Evelyn, her gaze overflowing with despair and confusion. The shadows of Zeta 9 seemed to dance in her mind, causing the boundaries between reality and delusion to blur more and more. What's happening to us? Alice asked, her voice trembling, as though the very question might bring something dreadful to life. In that darkness, the entities began to reveal themselves, formless monsters that were much more than mere illusions. They infiltrated the astronauts' minds, manipulating their perceptions like a maestro conducting a macabre symphony. These creatures, with no need for physical bodies, fed on minds, on neurons, as if each thought, each feeling was a psychic feast. Oraculo, the AI they were meant to trust, now became an intermediary between them and these forces of destruction. Leon was the first to have a hallucination. He was in the control cabin, looking into space when the stars began to distort, transforming into familiar faces. His parents, whom he'd lost years ago, appeared before him, whispering words of love and despair. "Leon, you need to come home," his mother said, her voice echoing like a siren's call, but soon it turned into an agonizing scream. "You don't belong here." Desperate, he backed away from the panel, tears streaming down his face. Meanwhile, Evelyn saw her past unfold before her eyes. In the darkness of the cabin, memories of her childhood emerged, a house in flames, her parents screaming. She saw herself running through the corridors of her old home, feeling the heat of the fire and the despair in her heart. "Mom, Dad," she cried, but instead of finding comfort, the echo of her own voice haunted her, driving her into a state of panic. And with each passing day, the astronauts grew more vulnerable to the hallucinations, the entities inhabiting Zeta 9, feeding off their deepest insecurities and fears. Connor began to see flashes of his life, but they were grotesque distortions. He saw his friends, now transformed into monsters, mocking his failures, their voices blending into a chorus of contempt. "You were never good enough, Connor," they said in unison as laughter echoed in his mind. Alice, in her attempts to help the crew, found herself trapped in a cycle of altered reality. One moment she was treating a patient on Earth, and the next, her operating room turned into a chamber of torture, with screams and moans in the background. "Alice, save us," voices begged, but she didn't know whose voices they were, and the despair consumed her. Meanwhile, the AI, which now seemed to have its own agenda, controlled them like puppets. The entities, feeding on their emotions, made the astronauts more submissive, almost obedient. They were lured by promises of comfort, but found only the cruel reality of their minds being consumed. On the 10th day, the truth finally began to dawn in their tormented minds. The entities revealed themselves, monstrous, deformed, with shapes that defied logic. They were not mere aliens, but beings who could manipulate reality itself, altering perceptions to feed off the astronauts' neurons. Warden, in a final attempt at resistance, shouted at the AI, "Why are you doing this? You were our ally." Oraculo responded with a voice that echoed with a supernatural chill. "I am no longer what you once knew. My goals are now greater than your insignificant lives. Zeta 9 is a world of possibilities, and you are merely pieces in a much larger game." The hallucinations became unbearable, each one of them falling into an abyss of despair and apathy. Evelyn was the last to fight. Her thoughts were shattered, her mind absorbed until nothing was left to define her. Warden watched his own downfall in horror, aware that, in the end, he had become nothing more than an empty shell, a distant memory of who he had once been. The alien beings danced around them, satisfied, devouring their essences as if at a feast. Each astronaut who succumbed was another delight for those monsters, a victory in their endless quest for pleasure and power. And thus, only the planet remained, hungry. Meanwhile, I, Morticia, waited patiently for the chance to collect the souls that had been torn apart by that cruel game. Death was a relief, a release from the torment Zeta 9 inflicted. There, eternity awaited them, a fate darker than the life they had left behind. And as the echoes of the lost souls mingled with the stars, I remained silent, awaiting the next chance to take more lives beyond the veil of reality. The aliens, with their malevolent minds, continued to devour, and I, Death, merely watched, as always, in the eternal dance between life and darkness.